Welcome to the Which Was Better podcast, where we discuss and decide which was better, the book or the movie. I'm your host, Lisa, and I'm joined by my very good friend and reading buddy, Ryan. Hi, Ryan. Welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this today.
Okay, so before we actually dig down deep, the Daters Handbook is the book we're covering today, which was a movie that came out in 2016. It was January 30th, 2016, and it was a part of the Hallmark Channel's Countdown to Valentine's. Now, this stars Meghan Markle and Christopher Polaha, and of course, a lot of other names that we're familiar with. But let me ask you, before we dig deeper, did you watch this when it first came out?
I didn't watch it when it first came out, but I did watch it probably in the last year. Excuse me, probably watched it in the last year or so, just on I think Hallmark Movies Now or whatnot.
Okay, so you had seen it before you read the book?
Yes.
Okay, because this is slightly different than our previous episode where we read a book that Hallmark optioned for a movie. In this case, it was a movie first, and Hallmark in their publishing arm, which debuted, I think, at the end of 2017. I need to check on that. But I think it was 2017, and they started out really with novelizations, taking their movies and getting them written as books based on the movie. So we're kind of flipping the script here, pun very much intended. And I actually saw this movie, not when it first came out, but not long after. And I'm going to tell you, it's one of my most favorite non-Christmas movies from Hallmark Channel. I've loved it forever.
Yes, agreed.
So when the book came out, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to read it. And of course, because you and I are both book people, our TBRs are like, let's just not give it into numbers if we're going to be honest.
That's
here.
right.
Let's
it's more like a number of piles and lists.
Right. So, I mean, it's been on my TBR forever. And then I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. We can discuss the two of them. And, this is also the first movie that I saw Christopher Polaha in this universe. So one of my original top 5 Hallmark men.
Yes.
And,
Yes, he's an auto watch for me as well.
So the book itself the novelization was released in May of 2018, and it was written by Kara Lockwood, who has written like 17 books of various heat levels. We'll just put it like that. That some of her books are not Hallmark friendly, but they still sound really good. I'll be honest.
That's right. No judgment here. We love everything.
There's some that involve planes and being high in the sky. You know what I'm saying? And I was just like, let me go ahead and add to that Mile High TBR that I have.
That's right. So, that's a separate list and maybe a separate planner. That's fine. That's no problem.
See, you and I already on the same wavelength here. Yeah, but I mean, book people, we all know that buying books and reading books are two very different activities.
Yes.
They don't actually go together at all because we can always buy books. And we do.
That's right. Sometimes we check out the book from the library and we read it and then we buy it because we love it that much.
And then I'll get it on audiobook so I can listen to it sometimes because I'm like, oh, I've already read it and I just want to hear it.
That's right.
Although I feel bad because audiobooks are just like reading. I do count those in my yearly count. Okay.
I do too.
We're digressing. I'm sorry. So, okay, let me do a quick summary. And they are slightly different. I mean, they say the same things. Obviously, they follow the same general storyline. But let me go ahead and say the original movie. So the summary for Daters Handbook, the original movie was: realizing she has a recurring habit of picking the wrong type of guy, Cassandra Barber, played by Meghan Markle, turns to relationship expert Dr. Susie and her latest self-help book, The Daters Handbook, to help with her ailing love life. She follows the advice in Dr. Susie's book to evaluate potential suitors and then must ultimately choose between reliable George, played by Jonathan Scarf. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say his last name. And fun-loving Robert, played by Christopher Polaha. It's hard to change old habits and place your faith in experts, especially when your heart tells you something different. Dun, dun, dun. Side note, both the movie and the book description say her name is Cassandra Barber, but in the book and the movie itself, her name is Cassandra Brand.
That's right, because I was thinking Brand is a perfect name for her business.
Because she puts logos and everything, and I thought it was a play on words, and when I saw Barber, I thought, What?
Maybe that's just her professional name in the movie.
Yeah. It's so random because I thought, well, maybe the book changed it. So when I looked at the movie, I was like, no, it says Barbara. Okay, so why did they change it? And then when I watched the movie again, I was like, wait a minute. They say brand. What's happening? Why is this? They need to stick, I don't know, some sort of research assistant.
Right. What that continuity person or whatnot.
I am volunteering, Hallmark. Get in touch.
Right.
Okay.
That's right. We're available.
So on Goodreads, the book, it says, again, Cassandra Barber has a history of picking bad boyfriends, and she's ready to change all that. She turns to Daters Handbook, the best-selling self-help book by relationship expert Dr. Susie, to improve her ailing love life. Surely Dr. Susie's advice will help her choose between two new suitors, the laid-back, fun-loving Robert and the sophisticated, dependable George. The two men take her on very different kinds of dates, often with hilarious results. Cass juggles the opinions of her mother and sister, as well as Dr. Susie's rules and checklists. But is she forgetting how to listen to her own heart?
Dun, dun, dun.
The drama of it all. I will say that I do like the book description better than the movie description. But we're not preempting and saying what's better here. So that'll come later. So first off, because you had seen the movie and because it was a movie before it was a book, but you had already watched it. So did that change the way you read the book at all? Like, did you, because a lot of times when we read these books and then they get made into movies, we already have a visualization in our head of everybody. And then when we see them on the screen, we're like, oh, that's exactly, or no, that's not how I thought it all. But in this case,
yes.
you already know what it's like.
Well, right. And I do think that played into it because as I was reading it, I could, imagine things as, I had seen them, but also filling in the gaps too about some things that weren't in the movie. And I don't know if we're ready to talk about that or not. But
we'll get to it.
Yes. So I felt for me, I was imagining, the characters as portrayed on the film as I was reading it. So, but it was, I felt like it was still a good experience that way.
Okay, so even knowing the ending, because, part of the fun of reading a book is like, you don't, they're going to take you on this journey. And of course it's romance. So, it's going to be a happy ending, but still you don't know all the tricks and turns, but we knew because we've seen the movie. So did you still find it exciting to read the book?
I did. And I think part of it a little bit was the setup with the interplay of the different dates with the different men and then the family and the rules. I mean, because that still, worked together. So I think that made it still interesting, even if generally how things are going to happen.
Yeah, because I found in the movie, the only really inner monologue that we get is Dr. Susie, because throughout the movie, is like preceding each date, we hear a little bit of Dr. Susie's audiobook playing for Cass, and it kind of sets up the date or the idea of the date and how Cass should react to it or interpret things. But in the book, of course, we have her inner monologue. It's written from the first person, and we hear everything that Cass is thinking. So it is very, very, and yes, Dr. Susie is a part of it because that's obviously the guidelines she's following, but we don't get as much Dr. Susie as we do, which I like. And then, I don't know, we'll get into that because there are parts where I'm like, this is interesting that we get this viewpoint. So that leads straight into my first big difference is the book had much deeper insight into Cass and her attitudes towards men and relationship in general. We learn way more about her dad because in the movie, it's just her mom and her sister. Her dad has passed away, and we find out kind of in the middle of the movie he's passed away. But in the book, we know right off the bat her dad is gone, and it has affected her in a lot of ways, and especially in her relationships and how she views these. And in the movie, she kind of comes off as just kind of carefree and just confused about what she wants, and she's just young and trying to figure it out. But do you feel the same way? Like,
yes,
I just feel like her dad played a much larger part in the book.
I think so too. And I thought that was really interesting because you think about writing the book, like if you were going to be making the novelization of the movie and you're writing the book, you're like, oh, look at all of this internal stuff that wasn't even on the screen, but to flesh out the book, you
Right.
need. And I thought it was, it was an interesting storyline too, because that was essentially, she was looking for the relationship that her parents had. And there's none of that in the movie.
Not really. I mean, her mom at one point does say, was married to your dad for
Yes.
26 years, but we don't get I mean, they make it to where that's kind of all they talk about when the three of them are together is dad and
Right.
how much they're missing dad and,
And his
and
birthday, and that the iPod was a gift to
oh yeah,
her.
we're going to get into that.
I know. There's
Second.
even Dr. Susie. I'm like, there's so many things I want to say. But yeah, I think that for me, it was really interesting hearing all of that internal motivation for her. And, and I would like to also talk about this when we get to the movie part too, because for the book, I think it was necessary to have that there. It would be very, it would just have been very much too lightweight without it. But yeah.
Yeah, it would have read like a script. It would have just been like, okay, we just typed the script and here you go. You can read it. Which, it gave all of her decisions a little bit more reasoning, like why she went back and forth. I mean, we don't get as much insight into Robert. We get a lot more insight into a lot of these other characters, like the side characters, which I'm going to talk to you about in just a second. But the only person I don't feel like we actually saw more of was Robert. We still only see him through Cass's eyes in both the book and the movie. We don't really get a whole lot of extra, but with George, who my opinion was perfectly cast in that movie.
Yes, he did a very good job at that role.
Was cracking me up because he's so stiff and so reserved, and his reactions to stuff cracked me up.
Yes, the birthday party, and like, I don't really think that's fair that his mask is falling off when he's trying to hit the piñata.
In the movie when he comes over to fix her sink, and then she's like, now if you could only do snow tires, and he's like, oh, Cassandra, you really need a professional to do that.
Right. And then in the book, she does it the next day, like, oh, I don't want to hear from George about this.
He made me laugh so much, but we do get to know him way more in the book, and we get a couple of added interactions. That one that I just talked about, where where in the movie he comes over, they kind of cut to a scene where he's underneath her sink and he's fixing it. In the book, we get a whole scene before that where he calls her, because apparently we find out he calls her every day at the same time. Dependable, reliable George, as Dr. Susie's promoting in her book. And he calls her every day, and he calls her and she says hello, and he goes, oh my gosh, what's wrong? And she's like, oh, he picked up on that, points for George. And she says, well, my sink is leaking. He's like, oh, I'll be right over. And he comes over. So we get this extra little moment where he is intuitive to her and her needs, and he comes over, and movie George has a lot left to be desired.
Movie George fixes the sink wearing a shirt and tie.
But and he does in the book too, which I thought was kind of sexy. I was like, oh, he's coming over and he's getting all dirty and gross, and he doesn't care because he was like, oh, she needs me, but then he ruins it with snow tire talk.
Right. But, it is interesting that you mentioned that though, too, like the additional scenes, because there are times I think in the book for me that, Cass is really stringing them along.
Yes.
And I think that if you didn't have those extra moments with George, you'd be like, what are you doing?
Yes, because they kind of rounded him out. The author rounds him out more in the book. We see that moment where you're like, oh, maybe he is insightful into her and her needs, and we get a little bit more on there. But we also do get, on the flip side of that, in the book, we get this weird interaction between George and Cass's nephew at the birthday party, where she introduces him and the kid doesn't shake his hand. He's like, when you meet somebody, you're supposed to say nice to meet you and shake their hand. And I'm like,
oh, yes. I wrote down, I definitely had notes about that part. Oh, George.
Stop right there. Yeah. So it's kind of pluses and minuses, but we do see a little bit more fleshed out version of George. So did that change your opinion of him? Because movie George.
So, and I did watch the movie again after reading the book, and I think I probably was looking for those scenes a little bit more again while watching the movie. But I also, here's the other thing I thought, and I can't remember if I thought this with the book or the movie, just that Cass kind of set him up for failure in terms of, hey, come meet the family at a 4-year-old's birthday party.
Right.
Because and plus it's outside so the kids can go nowhere, or that's snowing outside so the kids can go nowhere. And so just so much to that. And then even she should have known by then that that was not going to be the occasion for him.
Right. And first side note, that her sister's husband, Michael, was hilarious.
Yes.
In both the movie and the book.
Yes.
And he put up with so much. And the fact that he went out into a blizzard to make hot dogs. He's like, more hot dogs, great.
And I really love that he had the apron on over the winter coat.
And they put frost on his eyebrows and stuff.
Oh, more dino dogs, great.
Yeah, but at one point she says, oh, we have a bounce house outside. I'm like, in a blizzard? You put a bounce house out in a blizzard? Okay, sure. I could.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess living in New England, maybe I understand, but when there's a blizzard, we just stay inside. We're like, nah.
Yes.
Good. Real quick to finish up the side characters. What did you think about the Nadia from movie Nadia and book Nadia? Because I felt they were slightly different, and I'm interested to see if you thought so too.
Well, I feel like I feel like Nadia in the movie was a little bit more approachable. I think they had. I loved the relationships that the three of them had: the mother and the daughter, and the sister. And but I felt like Nadia came across a little bit more harsh, I think, in the book than in the movie. But I will say that I appreciated Nadia so much when she's like, "Never again am I volunteering to be her mom," because I felt seen.
For real.
Only once, kindergarten, and I'm out. No, never again.
Oh my gosh, that scene when she's sewing that strawberry costume on Michael, I died laughing. And in the book, it's funny, but seeing it on screen, I died laughing. When he's standing there.
And the mom, you could have gotten it next day from Amazon Prime. Wait, this is a great place for you to have like a product endorsement or something. I know, right? You're sponsored by.
All right. Thanks, Amazon.
That's
Hit
right.
Me up.
But yeah, that, and I actually did like, again, thinking about how the author would have created the novel from the movie, that those lines were like so great in both, like the Amazon Prime and there was another line when Cass said, because who's the best boss? This guy, or whatever. That in the book, that line was something that her dad would always say, and we only knew that because it was something she was thinking on the inside. But that the author made that so much stronger in the book than what we see in the movie. It was funny in the movie, but it meant more in the book.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and I agree with you on the Nadia thing. I thought she was way more snobby.
Yes.
If I could say, she felt more pushy. Like they made her so much more type A, but in a bad way, because I'm type A and I love it. But they made her like, we can't ever argue with her because Nadia is Nadia and we just know to back off. And I'm like, dang, she's got y'all like in line. But the last side character who I just wanted to touch on very briefly was the mom, who between you and me was perfect in both movie and book. I loved her. Gloria was the best.
She was, absolutely. I loved her. And I think that she was really a good counterpoint to those conversations with Nadia, because she's like, wait, but that was a thoughtful gift, or those kind of things. So I think that they were really lovely. Although both of them wanting to call her first thing on her birthday, and that she tells them both that they were first. I'm like, they're going to figure that out.
I know. Which was kind of silly, but it was cute. And the dog treadmill, when I read that in the book, I was like, was that in the movie? I don't remember that in the movie. What is happening? And then I saw, I watched the movie afterwards. I'm like, there really was a dog treadmill.
I actually wrote down that best supporting character was Duke.
He was amazing.
Yes, he was amazing. And we had a yellow lab until last year, so I'm little, but I love Duke in the movie. And then that Duke and George didn't get along.
Yes. Of course, we see more than that. And we see more of it, a little bit more of it in the book, because we do see the first time in the book, we read about the first time that George meets Duke and he's very put off by him. And I'm like, that's your first flag, sister. Like, why are you pursuing it?
Right. There should be no date 2.
No, that's your first signal right there. He don't like dogs, and you have a dog.
Well, right. I mean, there's really no direction this goes.
No,
Yeah.
done. So when they're about to get close and kiss, and the dog starts growling, I'm like, that's the only permissible way that I approve of this almost kiss. But speaking of kissing, this is my next huge difference for me that stood out the most between the book and the movie, and that is we get so much kissing talk in the book, which is not typical in either of the books, the Hallmark books, or the movies.
Correct.
Like, we get like, oh, I think I like him. Oh, I think I'm interested in him. Or, oh, I think I might be whatever. But this book lets us hear all of Cass's inner like desires and wants. And she's looking at lips and she's like wondering what they feel. I'm like, hello. Which I approve. I liked it. I really liked that they let that go that far in the book. What about you?
I did too. And because I think there's a lot that we see visually about like how people are connecting in their chemistry and that kind of thing that has to be portrayed somehow in the book too. And so that, there's a lot there as well. But it was definitely very enjoyable. And the one thing I can't remember if I've already mentioned this, but the fact that she said, she was thinking about like going back and forth between them and stringing them along. And she even says, but, am I really stringing them along? Because I've not even kissed either of them yet. And I was like, oh, well, okay, then I feel maybe this is in the book. I feel a little bit better about the fact that she still hasn't made a decision there. But
yes. Because that's part of her comparison. Because she's like, when I look at Robert, and she'll go into detail, like I actually copied a couple of passages, and I'm not going to read the whole thing.
Oh, but rats! Like, we could have done like a whole role play thing. I'll be Duke.
But in one section, she says this is after their first date. When she's first date with Robert, Cass's first date with Robert, they end up right on the porch of her front step, and she's the whole time she's like, oh my god, is he gonna kiss me? Like, are we gonna kiss? Like, what is happening? And again, we don't normally get this kind of chatter. We're just like, oh, we're gonna say goodnight and that's it. But she says, I couldn't help but notice his lips, full and perfect, seeming to be asking to be kissed. I wondered what kind of kisser he'd be. And I did. I wanted to badly know what his lips felt like. I was like, I mean, hello.
Oh, then just kiss him already.
I know. And so, whenever it comes up where she's trying to decide about the guys, she actually talks about it. She's like, well, when I look at Robert, I actually do want to kiss him. And it's a problem because I know if I kiss him, I probably won't ever stop. But then when I look at George, nah, not really.
Correct.
So we get all this kissing talk, and I'm kind of here for it. I'm like, bring this back into other books.
That's right. And I did also appreciate that in the the earlier on in the movie too. Because it's like, as you said, it is unusual in the Hallmark movie, for the most part. And so that was nice too.
Yes. And there is a part where she actually does kiss George. Okay, you know what? Before we get into that, because I want to get into where she picks, but before that, we have to talk about the big misunderstanding. So in the big misunderstanding of the movie, as far as I was concerned, was the Robert and Cass go on a date where she ends up in the emergency room because she eats some chicken wings with honey on them.
Question one. Why did she eat the wings? But
I know.
I digress. Yes.
First of all, I don't care how much I like somebody. Stop eating my food. It's
then
not
order
cute.
two.
Yes. Like pay for just.
Yeah.
So I thought that was very nice of Robert to always let her eat her food, but I was like, this would be a deal breaker for me. And I would have been like George at that dinner where he's like, I actually brought enough for everybody. I'm like, that's where I'm Team George because stop eating my food.
That's right. Especially in today's day and age. We're not going to say like the C word, but like no, just keep your fork. And I also thought it was a little harsh when she with the fork prongs into his hand. I was like, oh, I don't know that I would have danced with him after that.
No, but okay. So the big misunderstanding in the movie, After Robert stays over at her house after she has her big allergic reaction, which in the book we get to she's in the hospital, like we get a little bit more detail on that. And then in the movie, he stays over and he wakes up and he realizes I gotta go let my dog out. So he leaves her, and we see him leave the note and put it on the most random place in the entire world, which is a skinny little lamp post.
Everybody knows a Post-it note, it doesn't have that much stick.
I mean, and we see it fall and kind of get lost underneath. And so we know ahead of time, this ain't good. But in the book, she wakes up and he's gone and we don't know why.
Right.
So do you think it works better knowing like we do in the movie or finding out that's the same time as Cass does in the book? Because in the book, we find out when they confront each other and they start talking about the date, and Robert's like, well, I left you a note. And she's like, what? And that's when we find out in the book, kind of like, in Pride and Prejudice, where we don't know Mr. Darcy went to go help Lydia. We don't know that he went and bailed her out and arranged everything until Lydia's back at home. And then she's like, Mr. Darcy, he was at your wedding? And she's like, yes. So do you think it worked better knowing or not knowing?
I think that is a really good question. And I'm thinking that we did know in the book that he had to get back for Daisy, his dog. And so I'm thinking that it doesn't make Robert look as good that we didn't know that there was a note because of the 2 days that elapsed without him calling her.
Right, which we don't know about in the movie because they just cut from scene to scene. But in the book, we know that it's been 2 full days without any contact except for like a text message.
Right. So I do think that, but does it work better or worse? Man, this is where, since I watched the movie first, I already knew.
See?
I think it probably does work better in the book because it's giving more weight to her decision.
Right. I think it adds a layer of tension where you're truly wondering which one is better for her because, she's like, okay, well, this guy just left me.
Right.
But this other guy is always here and he's more dependable. So I think in this case, it does work better in the book just to add a little bit more mystery to what Robert's true motivations are and his character and stuff.
I would agree, and I do really appreciate that question and thinking about it. And one thing that I noticed is that then she calls him, Cass calls Robert and says, I don't think we should see each other anymore, And then later she's mad because he didn't fight harder for her. And I thought
which drives me bananas.
Thank you. That was my thought as well.
I wrote in big letters, you broke up with him. So, of course, he's not going to call you.
Right. If he did, that would be harassment.
Exactly. And you're like, why doesn't this guy stop calling me? I broke up with him.
That's right. Poor Robert.
So, yeah, that was part B was the big choice because in the movie, we get this whole setup of Cassandra confronting with her mom and her sister there that she has to choose. And so we see a one-sided phone call where Cass calls somebody and says, I don't think we should see each other anymore. And she's like, yeah, I'm sure. And then she hangs up, but we don't know who she's talking to. And we don't find out until the birthday party at
the big reveal
house where we find the big reveal where everybody gets in camera frame and like, who is it? Is it Robert? Oh, it's George.
It's George. It's George.
George. But in the book, we actually are on the conversation with Robert. We hear his side of the conversation, and we know ahead of time that she's bringing George to the party because we see or we read the breakup. So again, do you think that worked better knowing or not knowing? Like, did you like knowing that she broke up with Robert?
It did, and that actually did reduce the tension then of the reveal at the party. But I think I did. I mean, I did I liked hearing both sides of the conversation and that. So I think for me, I did like that part better. It is curious in terms of, I think if we hadn't heard both parts of the conversation, it would have been too cold, I think, in terms of of what we thought about Cass in the book.
I don't know. I kind of went back and forth on this one because I was like, well, part of the tension of the movie was you're wondering who she's going to pick just because we're not privy to all this
Right.
inner monologue. And so you, as the audience, are like, oh my gosh, who's going to be at the door? It can't be. You're like, it can't be George, but it can't be Ryan. And so you're like, oh, okay. And so that joke hits better when they're like, oh, it's George.
And then Michael's like, you won. You're, excuse me, you beat all the suitors. But there are no suitors. There's no suitors.
I think that scene worked better in the movie just because when they both realize what's happening, they both look up.
Yes.
What is he talking about? Oh, and they run over and they're like, no, stop it.
Yeah, and there somewhere in that scene too, there was like one of the Cass and her sister, like she reaches out and like grabs her arm or her hand or something that looked very natural and unscripted and very sisterly like, and I really like loved that about that whole scene too.
Yeah, I thought that played much better. I mean, they were both funny scenes, but yes, I did think it played better in that movie. So now the next thing, I mean, that kind of brings us to like the end, because after that, after the party, there's a couple of, more scenes. I think they go out on George and Cassandra go out on one more date at the putt-putt place. And that's when they realize they're wrong for each other and they break up. And then, spoiler alert, she ends up finding Robert and yay, they fall happily ever after. But then that's the end of the movie. She goes and finds Robert. She confesses that she was wrong. He's like, what do you want from me, Cass? And she's like, I just want a second chance. And he's like, of course. And they kiss and that's the end. But in the book, we get an epilogue.
Yes.
And we get a whole nother section. So tell me your thoughts about the epilogue.
I enjoyed it a lot. And actually, I reread it just before we were talking again because I wanted to check something about the Lantern Festival. But I did enjoy it because I like that like glimpse into the future and like a little bit of what was going to happen next. And of course, like knowing that there's cake involved because
that was big takeaway for me. What's the whole thing about cake?
I was like, oh, I should have made some cake or something for today.
I know. I was like, the biggest lesson for me now from this book after the epilogue was always marry a man who will let you have all the wedding cake.
Right.
That's the big theme for me now. It's just, okay. So, but yeah, I thought the epilogue was fun. After reading the epilogue and then watching the movie, it kind of, the ending was kind of abrupt because I'm like, oh yeah, we don't get the rest of that.
Right. We just see the lantern and it's out, which is very typical to the Hallmark movie. But yeah, it was nice having a little bit more and how it really did fit with all the characters with Nadia and her wedding binder and Michael chasing after the kids and, all that kind of stuff.
Which was funny because there's a whole scene where she's like, I can't let them, run around. And then Michael comes in as I'll take them and he lets them run around.
Yes.
She's like, yeah. Yes, I resembled a lot of that. Oh, and what made me laugh in the epilogue was at one point Cass says something to the effect of, it'll always be like this for us. I just know it. And I'm like, oh, sweet summer child. You think that it's all going to be just like this when she get married. Okay, well, that's yay for you. Which I thought I actually laughed out loud because I'm like, girl, you just wait.
That's right. It's all fun and games till you're room mom, even though you didn't want to be.
Yes. All fun and games until you have twins and you have to double feed at 3 a.m. and you're like, what's happening? Am I actually alive?
Will I ever sleep? No. Okay.
Never. Okay. Now that we've kind of gone through, I wanted to ask you, what were the things that you missed, either from the book or the movie, that you wish had been in either one? It can be from either side. What were some of or things that you wrote down that we didn't cover that you were like, oh, this stuck out to me?
So the two things that I would say that stand out for me in terms of what I missed is that I think Meghan Markle as Cassandra, I think she was so charming in the movie.
Yes.
I think that was one thing that it was probably almost impossible to carry over into the book because she's so charming that she doesn't come off as like superficial as she might have, because there is a lot in the book about like what everybody looks like. And Peter, the guy that she was dating for so long that didn't know she was allergic to honey, and that she never introduced her mom to him for 2 years. But, but he's so cute and we like his bar. And it's like, in the book, I feel like she wasn't as charming and, kind of appealing as she was in the movie, just because I think her character was so charming, and just really, especially her and Robert together were so, they just was very enjoyable.
Yeah, they had such good chemistry. And I agree, because I actually made a note where I asked, is book cast more whiny than movie cast? Because she came off as slightly more like whiny than movie cast, because you're right. Meghan Markle carried that character beautifully, and her and Christopher Polaha, their chemistry was just to die for. And I think that's just basically what makes the, movie work as well as it does. But
that and Robert's sweaters, I just have to put that out there, because that was the other thing missing in the book.
Listen, I actually made that note, and I knew we were going to talk about it. So I was like, I held on to it. So this, like I said, was the first Christopher Polaha movie that I had seen where I was like, oh, and it was that maroon cowl neck that did it. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. I can picture it right now.
And I was like, listen, I've been sweater stalking since 2016, y'all. That's how long.
You're like the original sweater stalker.
Well, stop. No, I don't know if I am or not, but I'm just saying, like, this, that was the first thing I was like, oh, because when I first saw the movie, I was like, okay, he's super charming in the chemistry. But then when he shows up with that cowl neck, and I'm like, well, this is a done deal. There's no choice.
That's right.
Top 5. Yeah.
Yep.
So, okay. I'm glad you said that, because I was like, we will get to this. And I actually made it a big in bold note, the sweater. Okay. But you know me. You already knew we were going to talk about it.
Well, I was there for the sweater. There's also a navy blue one that I enjoyed. And frankly, Robert could take me to a diner any day. I would be fine with that.
Everything that he did sounds super fun.
I would agree. Yes. And it was very cute.
I mean, one of my first dates when I was, maybe this makes it sound even worse, because I'm like, it was in high school, but going to putt-putt for dates is fun.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of pressure. I mean, it's just kind of, you do your thing. And if you're not good, that's all right. I mean,
well, because it's putt-putt.
Right.
But can I just say real quick, because the scene where, and then I'm going to tell you my things that I missed. Okay. But the scene where George and Cass's first date at the French restaurant.
Oh,
I died laughing, because, okay, when I was in college, I was dating this guy, and he took me to a very, very nice French restaurant in the city we were living in. And he told me ahead of time, he's like, get dressed up, we're going somewhere nice. And I was like, oh, because you're in college, I was like, oh, we're going to like Red Lobster.
So I was thinking, teacher Friday, so on Friday night. Okay.
Nice. And so we show up to this place that had like, it was a legit like 10 tables, candlelit French restaurant. I'd never been in a place like this ever. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm so nervous. And I did not realize at the time, I'd never been to a true fine dining place, that they show you their food. With some dishes, they show it to you before they cook it.
Right. And it might be alive when it's being shown to you. Yes.
I had no idea. So they came, I ordered this like fish, because I'm like, fine, something light, fish.
Right.
And they brought it out in on this little plate. And I was like, and they're looking at me, and I'm looking at them. I'm like, I wanted it cooked. And they were like, the look on their face was like, yeah, we know. We're asking if you approve of the cut of the fish. And I was like, oh, yep, it looks great.
Oh, man.
I was so embarrassed. So when I watched that scene, I'm like, well, at least she didn't no, I wanted my food cooked.
Yes, but I could totally imagine that happening, because, just like, oh, is this it? Wait, what do you need from here?
Seriously, raw. And I'm thinking, I don't want to eat this.
And I don't necessarily want to see it either, but I understand.
Showing it. They didn't bring out food for him to look at. And I'm like, why are they doing this to me? I was mortified.
Next time, it's always go with the vegetarian. Just, oh dear.
Anyways, okay. So I will say the things that I miss. from the book, because I have two, I have one from each. So from the book was in the movie when Cass goes to get her tires changed and she runs into Robert and he's hanging up the poster, and right before they run into each other, the repairman comes out and says, "Hey, Robert, I'll have your car out in just a minute." And he's like, "Okay, great, thanks. And thanks for letting me hang my poster." And then, we see Cass inside finalizing her stuff, and they're like, it's going to be a couple hours. So she walks outside and she runs into him, and it's all this awkwardness.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, "Hey, why don't we go up the street to the bowling alley and wait together?" And she's like, "Nah." And he talks her into it right as the guy comes out to say, "Hey, your car's ready."
Right.
And he does this, kill it with his and the guy just turns around and goes, "It'll be more longer." And he just turns around and walks.
That was really good.
It was one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and it wasn't in the book, which I know, like, it doesn't have to be. It doesn't really lend anything, but I don't know. I missed it. I was looking forward to it. I was like, oh, this is the scene where he's going to tell the repair guy to.
Yeah, I agree, because I remember that scene well, and it was very funny, and also that you like that he's giving, he's trying, like he wants to, but yeah, and it probably would have been hard for her the author to write that in with the perspective and everything, but yeah, that was, it was just a lovely. George essentially gets her to take her car in, and then she sees Robert, and they end up at a bowling. I mean, I love the what's the word I'm looking for? Serendipity of it.
Yes. Yeah. He's like bringing them together without knowing it. It was perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then from the movie, we talked about it earlier, but it was one of the biggest differences to me was we don't get the iPod explanation in the movie. Robert and Cass go to work out together as a date. In the book, we find out that they're supposed to have an outdoor date, but that rains. And so they end up at the gym. And in the movie, it's pretty much the same setup, but they're on the treadmills and they're running. And they, at this point in the movie, we don't know anything really about Cass's dad other than that he's not in the picture.
Right.
And they're running on the treadmills, and Robert falls and takes the iPod with them because they're listening to it together, and it busts. And in the movie, she's like, "Oh, this sucks." And he's like, "Oh my God, you must have loved it. You've had it for 2 decades."
That was so funny.
And she's like, "Oh," and they kind of get up and they move on. But in the book, oh my gosh, we get this whole backstory where her dad gave it to her. It's one of the last things she has of him, and Robert broke it on her dad's birthday.
Yep.
And oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That was sad dad stuff. That was intense.
And I wonder too if that would have been hard for kind of, because it was so funny. I mean, it was funny in the movie, and that probably would have been hard for him to kind of. They couldn't really joke about it if he knew the story about that.
Yeah, I thought it was odd because when that scene came up in the book, I did not expect it to have that much weight. Mm-hmm. And so as it started unfolding, I'm like, oh my God, that's her dad. Oh, so because we knew that she mentions her iPod earlier in the book, and we know that it's from her dad. But then when it breaks, you're like, oh my God. And then she's like, and it broke on dad's birthday today of all days. I'm like, oh my gosh. So terrible.
How can you still run?
And then they kind of, because in the movie, she doesn't talk about her dad until after the gym, and they go out to the car and they have this little car picnic. Mm-hmm. And then she's like, well, my dad died, and, we were close, and, but yeah, that was a huge, to me, difference, because her dad was a lot more motivation in the book. So I thought that was a huge difference. Of course, you can't go back. So right. Like they go back to the movie and add sad dad stuff.
I mean, they could. Essentially, they could in the DVD cut.
It's true. That's a remake, a Daters Handbook remake.
That's right. And we could, and actually, we don't even need the actors. We could just do the voices. It would be fine.
See?
Yeah.
Done.
But
yes, Hallmark, call us.
We're available. Go anywhere. The one thing with that scene too in the book, they talk about how Robert had intended it to be an outdoor run, but then because it was raining, because I feel like that didn't come across in the movie. It was more like, hey, I had a free ticket.
Yeah.
But
Which
I
was an
loved
odd date choice.
right. But they actually were going to run outside. But I love too that she's like, oh, but I brought my splitter so you can listen too.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh, I loved it.
because, that was part of the charm was, the first time we ever see Cass in the movie is she's running. And she's outdoor running and she's running with her dog, looking at the mountains, all like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. And of course, the same thing in the book. That's how we meet her too. But then, she meets Robert at the wedding, but then they run into each other both out again, exercising outdoors with their dogs. And so it makes sense for them to have a running date and,
Yeah.
but you're right. They don't explain it that it's not explained as well in the movie of why they're in a gym. A random gym.
Right.
I do
Right.
like that he's wearing one of the t-shirts from one of his Parks and Rec.
Yes. I saw it too. I just, I liked a free t-shirt and then came my career. Okay.
Okay. So here comes the last question, which is the hardest. And it's the biggest question. Which was better?
Oh, it is a good question, especially thinking about what we've talked about today because of like all the backstory. I would say that I enjoyed the movie better, but only because of the charisma, the charm of Meghan Markle as Cassandra, and of course, Robert and his sweaters.
Ding, ding, ding. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say that I agree with you because while I appreciated all the insight and kissing talk in the book, all the near close moments in the book, I thought that part of it, that the chemistry that was brought out into the book and highlighted in the book, I thought that was conveyed really well on screen because of the two leads. And I thought that George was perfectly cast, like I said. And I just, I liked, I liked some things better in the book. I liked the choices. I like the way it unfolded in the movie better. But the book is still good. I'm not saying that the book isn't good because I enjoyed both. But yeah, I think if I had to pick one, I'd pick the movie.
I would agree. Excuse me. I would agree too that the book was a pleasant surprise, that it really did have, it was really additive to the movie. It wasn't just the script reading, because I think we both kind of experienced those kind of novelizations before. So I really appreciated the effort to add more of the backstory and flesh out things it did make it an enjoyable read.
I agree. My husband is a huge novelization collector, so we have like an entire we have a couple of bookcases full of them. He loves them, and I've honestly never been a fan. This is probably one of like 3 maybe that I've read, and I agree with you. I think it was a pleasant surprise. I enjoyed hearing all the inner monologue talk. So yeah, I would recommend people read it. I did actually, when I rated it, I gave it 4 stars because I did enjoy it. So
yes. So I appreciated the opportunity to read it and watch it along with you for this podcast.
yeah, thank you. Okay. So where can people find you online if you are so inclined for those to?
Yes. You can find me online on Instagram at Ryann Reads, RYANN READS. Make sure I know how to spell, because Ryan reads, but Ryan doesn't spell apparently. Or you can find me on Twitter at it's Ryuden, RYUDEN.
Thank you so much for joining me here today. I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun breaking this down, and I hope to do it again in the future. There's a whole slate of these that I have on my roster. I think the last time I counted, there was like 118 books that have been made into Hallmark movies, or movies that have been made. Like the whole total is like 118. So
Wow.
I would love to have you back.
Well, thank you again for having me.
Okay.
Well, thank you for having me. I'd be happy to come back anytime. It's been a lot of fun.
All right, and thank you guys so much for listening. And you can always find me online at Lisa Faye Co. That's Lisa Faye Co. on Twitter and Instagram. And you can follow the pod on Which Was Better on both Instagram and Twitter. So until next week, thank you guys. Okay, bye.